They didn't pull away because your love was wrong. They pulled away because your love went too deep, too close, too real, too familiar, to a place inside them. They spent their whole life trying not to feel. You didn't scare them by asking for more. You scared them by touching something they buried a long time ago. And the moment your love reached it, everything changed. Not because they stopped caring, but because they started feeling things they were never taught. How to survive. This is the part no one explains. Some people don't run from love because they don't want it. They run because love activates the parts of them that were never protected, never soothed, never held, never understood. Your love didn't arrive as romance to them. It arrived as exposure, as memory, as nervous system alarm, as a reminder of needs they learned were dangerous. You didn't just love them, you awakened them. An awakening is terrifying when someone has built their entire identity around staying numb. At first, they leaned in because your warmth felt familiar in a way they couldn't explain. Your consistency felt grounding. Your presence felt safe. Your attention felt like home. But home is complicated. For someone who learned early, that closeness comes with cost. That need leads to disappointment. That dependence leads to pain. That vulnerability leads to loss. So when your love stayed, really stayed, it didn't just feel good. It felt dangerous. Because suddenly, they weren't just being liked. They were being seen. And being seen meant their defenses started failing. You noticed the shifts. Before they did, the way they went quiet. After moments of closeness, the way they changed tone. When things got emotional, the way they pulled back. Right after you connected, you thought it was about you. But it wasn't. It was about what your love was waking up inside them. You were gentle. You were present. You were emotionally available. And to someone with unhealed wounds, that can feel like pressure, even when you're not asking for anything. Because your love wasn't demanding, it was revealing. It showed them how much they'd learned to survive alone, how much they'd trained themselves not to need, how much they'd buried just to function. And the deeper you loved, the harder it became for them to keep pretending they were unaffected. Your care softened them in places they'd hardened for decades. Your reassurance reached the child in them who learned early not to expect anyone to stay. Your consistency challenged the belief that closeness always ends in abandonment. And when that belief started cracking, panic crept in. Not conscious panic, nervous system panic. The kind that feels like, I don't know why I'm uncomfortable. I don't know why I'm pulling away. I don't know why I suddenly feel trapped. They didn't understand it either. They just knew. Something inside them felt exposed, raw, unprotected, unsafe, because your love didn't match the chaos they grew up in. It didn't come with instability. It didn't come with emotional whiplash. It didn't come with unpredictability. It came with steadiness. And steadiness is unfamiliar to someone whose nervous system learned to stay alert. So their body reacted before their mind could catch up. They started distancing, not to hurt you, but to regulate themselves. They needed space to quiet the internal alarm. Your closeness activated space to reassemble the walls. Your love was gently dissolving. You felt the shift. The warmth cooled. The communication changed. The ease disappeared. And you wondered what you did wrong. But here's the truth. No one tells you. You didn't trigger their fear by loving incorrectly. You triggered it by loving consistently. You didn't awaken their wounds by asking for too much. You awakened them by offering something real, something safe, something steady, something that required emotional presence. and presence is threatening to someone who survived by disconnecting, because connection forces memory. It brings back moments they never processed, times they needed comfort and didn't receive it, times they reached for someone and were ignored, times vulnerability was met with dismissal, criticism, or abandonment. Your love didn't create those wounds. It touched them, and once touched, they couldn't stay buried. So their system did what it learned long ago: pull back, shut down, create distance, regain control. Control is safety for someone who grew up without emotional security, and your love, as pure as it was, threatened that control, because love asks for presence, not perfection, not intensity, presence. And presence means staying. When things get uncomfortable, they didn't know how. So they withdrew, not because they didn't care, but because caring was waking something they never learned how to soothe. You saw the confusion in them, the push-pull, the hot-cold, the closeness followed by distance. That wasn't manipulation. It was dysregulation. Their heart leaning in, their nervous system pulling out, because your love was asking them to grow past survival. And survival was all they ever knew. You were offering a new way of being, a softer way, a connected way, a vulnerable way. And that kind of transformation is terrifying when no one taught you how to feel safe inside love. So they did the only thing their body knew how to do. They buried it again. They buried the feelings. They buried the longing. They buried the attachment. And unfortunately, they buried you with it. Not because you weren't important, but because you were. You mattered enough to reach the place they were protecting the most. And once that place was touched, nothing could stay the same. This is where it starts to hurt, because you loved with openness, and openness made you vulnerable to someone who wasn't ready to feel. You stayed present while they disappeared. You leaned in while they shut down. You tried to understand while they tried to escape. And slowly, you began carrying the weight of their unhealed past. You felt rejected for offering warmth. You felt too much for wanting connection. You felt confused by their sudden distance. But the truth is, your love didn't fail. It revealed. It revealed the parts of them that still needed healing, the parts they didn't want to see, the parts they didn't know how to care for. And instead of facing those parts, they stepped away from you, because facing you meant facing themselves. And that was a step they weren't ready to take. What makes this part so painful is not just that they pulled away, it's that you stayed, trying to make sense of something that was never about effort. You replayed conversations. You softened your needs. You explained yourself more gently. You told yourself, they're just overwhelmed. They're scared. They've been hurt before. And maybe all of that was true. But here's the part that quietly drained you. You started translating your love into something less threatening, so they wouldn't run. You made yourself smaller without realizing it. You held back words that wanted to be spoken. You delayed needs that deserved to be met. You waited through silence, hoping it meant processing instead of avoidance. And slowly, your nervous system began mirroring theirs. You became alert, hyper-aware, always scanning for shifts, not because you were insecure, but because connection had become unpredictable. One moment, they were close, warm, present. The next, they were distant, unavailable, gone. That inconsistency does something quiet, but profound, to someone who loves deeply. It teaches you to question your own instincts, to doubt your emotional reality, to wonder if you imagined the closeness, because it disappeared so fast. But you didn't imagine it. They felt it too. That's why it scared them. People don't retreat from what means nothing. They retreat from what threatens. The way they've survived. And your love was asking them to live differently, to stay emotionally present when discomfort arose, to communicate instead of disappear, to feel instead of shut down. And that kind of shift is not romantic to the nervous system of someone who learned early. That feeling equals danger. So when you leaned in, they didn't just see affection. They saw risk. They saw dependency. They saw exposure. They saw the possibility of loss. And instead of naming that fear, they masked it as distance. But here's where it becomes unfair to you. Because while they were protecting themselves, you were slowly abandoning yourself. You kept offering safety to someone who couldn't hold it. You kept extending understanding while your own needs stayed unmet. You kept loving while quietly absorbing rejection. And love is not meant to feel like emotional self-erasure. The moment you begin questioning whether your needs are too much, something sacred has already been crossed. Your love wasn't too intense. It was too real for someone still living in emotional survival mode. And survival mode cannot coexist with intimacy because intimacy requires regulation, the ability to stay present while emotions move, the capacity to tolerate closeness without panicking, the willingness to repair instead of retreat. And they didn't have those tools, not because they were bad, but because no one taught them. So your love became the mirror that showed them what they were missing. And mirrors are uncomfortable when you're not ready to change. You weren't asking them to heal overnight. You weren't demanding perfection. You were simply showing up as yourself, open, consistent, emotionally available. And that alone was enough to destabilize the system they'd built to survive. So they did what felt safest. They disconnected. And in that disconnection, you felt the loss before the relationship even ended. You grieved while still present. You missed them while they were still there. You held hope while feeling yourself slowly become less prioritized. That limbo is one of the hardest places to exist emotionally because you're not given closure. You're given confusion, and confusion keeps you attached. It keeps you waiting for the version of them you glimpsed in moments of closeness. You tell yourself, that's who they really are. And maybe it is. But potential is not partnership. And glimpses are not consistency. You weren't wrong for seeing their depth. You were wrong only in believing that love alone could access it. Because depth without safety turns into distance. And love without regulation turns into withdrawal. The truth you may not want to hear yet is this. Your love touched something buried. But touching isn't the same as healing. You revealed the wound. But only they can choose to tend to it. And no amount of patience, empathy, or self-sacrifice can do that work for them. You didn't fail them. You showed them what was possible. And instead of rising to meet it, they retreated to what was familiar. That doesn't mean they didn't care. It means caring cost them more than they were ready to pay. And you paid the difference with your energy, your emotional availability, your self-trust. This is the part where many people stay stuck. They keep loving from a distance, hoping time will soften fear, hoping space will bring clarity. But space doesn't heal wounds. Awareness does, and willingness, and accountability. And until those exist, distance is not processing, it's avoidance. And you cannot build intimacy with someone who uses distance to regulate emotions. At some point, your nervous system starts asking for safety too. It starts asking, Where am I in this? Who is holding me? Why am I always the one adjusting? And those questions matter because love is not meant to feel like endurance. You are not meant to carry the weight of someone else's unhealed past on your back. You were meant to be met, not managed. And the moment you begin realizing that, something shifts in you, not dramatically, quietly. You stop over-explaining. You stop chasing clarity. You stop shrinking your needs. You start noticing how much effort it takes just to stay emotionally connected. And you begin asking a different question, not, how do I make this work? But, is this working for me? That question is the beginning of your return. And it's also the moment they feel you changing, even if they don't say it. Because when you stop pouring, the absence is felt, and that absence activates something else entirely. There is a moment that doesn't look dramatic. From the outside, no confrontation, no big speech, no sudden exit, just a quiet internal shift. It happens when you realize you can't keep explaining yourself to someone who keeps disappearing. When it matters, it happens when your body gets tired before your heart does. You stop checking your phone as often. You stop rewriting messages to sound easier to respond to. You stop waiting for emotional crumbs to feel like connection. And without announcing it, you begin coming back to yourself. This is the moment they feel before they understand. Because your energy changes before your behavior does. You're still kind, still warm, still respectful, but you're no longer reaching into the empty space they leave behind. And for someone who regulates through distance, this creates a strange sensation. At first, they feel relief. No pressure, no emotional demand, no need to show up differently. They think, good, they've calmed down. But what they're really feeling is the absence of pursuit. And that absence is unfamiliar because even distance needs something to push against. And now, there's nothing. That's when the buried part stirs again. Not the wound your love touched, but the attachment they denied. The part of them that quietly relied on your presence without ever acknowledging it. The part that felt safe, knowing you were there, even when they weren't. When that certainty fades, their system reacts, not with longing at first, with unease. Something feels off. They can't name it, but they feel less grounded because they didn't realize how much your consistency had been regulating them. You were the steady point they orbited around without ever committing to. And now, the orbit feels unstable. This is when they may resurface. A message, a check-in, a subtle reach, not to reconnect fully, but to test, to see if you're still there, in the same way. And if you are, the cycle continues. But if you aren't, if your energy doesn't rush to meet them, if your warmth doesn't overextend, something deeper is activated. Loss, not dramatic loss, quiet loss, the kind that settles in slowly, when there's no one left, absorbing your emotional overflow. They begin feeling the weight of their own emotions. The silence gets louder. The avoidance doesn't soothe the way it used to, because avoidance only works when someone else is holding the connection. And now, no one is. This is when they start thinking about you in moments they didn't before, not because they suddenly became secure, but because the regulation you provided is gone. They remember how you listened, without judgment, how you stayed present when things were hard, how you didn't disappear when they shut down. And that memory hits differently now that you're not filling the gaps. But here's the crucial part. This awareness does not automatically lead to change. It can lead to reaching out. It can lead to missing you It can even lead to regret. But without inner work, it does not lead to repair. Because missing someone is not the same as being able to show up for them. They may feel the loss without knowing how to bridge it. And this is where your choice matters most. Because the moment they feel the absence of you, you are faced with a fork in the road. You can rush back to soothe the discomfort you sense in them, or you can stay with the discomfort you feel in yourself. And staying with yourself is harder at first because you're no longer distracted by trying to fix someone else. You begin noticing how tired you are, how much you gave without receiving, how often you adapted while they stayed the same. And that awareness can feel like grief. Grief for the version of them you hoped they'd become. Grief for the connection that almost was. Grief for the time you spent waiting for something that never fully arrived. But grief is honest, and honesty is the foundation of real healing. You stop romanticizing their potential. You stop excusing their absence. You start seeing the relationship for what it was, not what it could have been if they healed. And clarity brings boundaries, not walls. Boundaries. You stop offering unlimited access to your emotional world. You stop making yourself available to partial connection. You stop negotiating with inconsistency. And this shift changes the entire dynamic. Because now, if they come back, they don't find the same version of you. They find someone more grounded, more self-respecting, less willing to disappear inside someone else's needs. And that can go one of two ways. Either they rise and begin doing the work they avoided, or they retreat further because your growth exposes their stagnation. Both outcomes lead you forward because neither requires you to abandon yourself again. The truth is, your love touching their buried wounds was never the problem. The problem was believing that love alone could do what only self-awareness can. You didn't lose them by stepping back. You stopped losing yourself. And that's the turning point. There's a quiet strength that forms when you stop waiting to be chosen by someone who never learned how to choose presence. It doesn't arrive as confidence. It arrives as peace, the kind that settles in when your nervous system is no longer on edge, when you're no longer bracing for distance, when love no longer feels like something you have to manage. This is the part where the story changes, not because they came back, but because you came home. You stop asking why your love wasn't enough. You stop wondering what you could have done differently. You stop carrying responsibility for wounds you didn't create. And something important clicks. Your love didn't fail. It did exactly what real love does. It revealed truth. It showed you who could meet you and who couldn't. It exposed where safety existed and where it didn't. And it taught you how much you are capable of giving. That matters because people who love deeply often walk away from these experiences believing they were too much, too emotional, too intense, too available. But the truth is, you were only too much for someone who hadn't learned how to hold love without fear. You weren't asking for perfection. You were asking for presence. And presence is not something you should ever have to beg for. The moment you stopped pouring was the moment your energy returned to you. Slowly, quietly, naturally, you began sleeping better, thinking clearer, feeling less anxious, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped overextending. And that's when your love finally had space to flow somewhere safe, into friendships that didn't disappear, into passions that didn't pull away, into yourself. And here's the part that often goes unspoken. Sometimes, much later, they feel it, not the dramatic regret people imagine, but a subtle awareness. They remember how safe it felt to be with you, how regulated they felt in your presence, how your consistency quieted parts of them they never understood. And for a moment, they wish they had stayed. But by then, you're no longer available to be half loved because growth changes what you tolerate. You no longer confuse familiar pain with connection. You no longer translate silence into meaning. You no longer mistake longing for compatibility. You understand now that love is not supposed to feel like self-abandonment. It's supposed to feel like mutual grounding, like two nervous systems learning how to stay instead of flee. And if they never reach that place, that is not your failure. Your role was never to heal them. Your role was to love honestly. And you did. That love touched something they buried. And instead of blaming yourself for what surfaced, you can honor the truth. Not everyone who feels love is ready to receive it. Not everyone who desires connection knows how to sustain it. And not everyone who meets you is meant to stay. But everyone who meets you is changed, including you. Because now, you love with discernment, with boundaries, with self-trust. You no longer chase depth. Where safety is absent, you choose reciprocity. You choose presence. You choose peace. And if this resonates, if you've ever loved someone who couldn't hold what you gave, this is your reminder. You didn't lose love. You outgrew survival-based connection. And that is not an ending. It's an initiation into healthier bonds, into safer love, into a version of yourself that no longer disappears for anyone. If this spoke to you, let it land. Sit with it. And if you're ready to keep choosing yourself, stay here. There is nothing wrong with the way you love, only with who you give it to. If this helped you see your story with more clarity, leave a quiet heart in the comments. Not for me, for you. And if you want to keep exploring this kind of emotional truth, the kind that brings you back to yourself, you're in the right place. We're just getting started.